the first thing I noticed wasn't the cold bite of the zip tie digging into my wrists. It wasn't even the snickers rippling through the crowd like static. It was the champagne fountain, glittering, absurdly cheerful, bubbling away just 3 feet to my left, pink liquid cascading over tiers of crystal like some grotesque parody of celebration. I stood in the center of it all, barefoot on cold marble, the hem of my navy bridesmaid dress snagged on a chair leg, my arms pulled tight behind my back by my own cousin's hands. "She stole Nana's ring," Aunt Dolores announced, voice sharp enough to cut glass, projecting to the 100 or so guests who'd gathered for Leela's wedding reception. "Right off her finger while she was in hospice. Can you believe the nerve?" Heads swiveled, phones lifted. A woman in lilac sequins actually stepped closer, squinting at my hand like I might be hiding contraband in my palm. My breath came shallow, but I kept my spine straight. I'd worn Nana's sapphire ring on purpose tonight, not to flaunt it, but because I knew they'd come for it. I just hadn't expected it to happen like this, under fairy lights to the soundtrack of string quartet covers of pop songs, with waiters weaving through the chaos holding trays of canapés. The humiliation was surgical. They wanted it public, permanent, recorded. They wanted me branded a thief before I could even speak. And then, through the blur of judgmental stares and flashing screens, I saw him. Uncle Marcus. He stood just inside the ballroom archway, slightly out of place in a rumpled charcoal suit that looked slept in, his silver hair uncombed, a manila envelope clutched in one hand like a shield. He hadn't been to a family event in over 2 years, not since the funeral, not since the first whispers started about Maya taking advantage. But there he was, eyes locked on me, expression unreadable except for the set of his jaw. He didn't rush forward, he didn't shout, he just appeared. Like a ghost summoned by injustice. Aunt Dolores followed my gaze and scoffed. "Oh, look, Marcus the myth, come to defend your little protégé." But Uncle Marcus didn't answer her. He walked straight toward me, slow and deliberate, the crowd parting like he carried some invisible gravity. When he reached me, he didn't look at my bound hands first. He looked me in the eyes. "You okay, kid?" he asked, voice low, rough with something I couldn't name. Grief, rage, relief. I nodded, throat tight. Then he turned to the room, holding up the envelope so the red certified copy stamp caught the light. "Before anyone else plays judge," he said, calm as a courtroom clerk, "you might want to hear what Alina actually left behind." The snickering stopped, the phones lowered. And right there in the middle of a wedding meant to unite families, the real story began, not with a scream but with a sealed document, a sapphire flashing under chandeliers, and the quiet certainty that I hadn't been abandoned after all. They thought they'd exposed a thief. They had no idea they'd just walked into their own reckoning. Less than an hour before they zip-tied me in front of 100 strangers, I was standing alone in the bridal suite bathroom, staring at my reflection like it might offer an escape route. My fingers trembled as I typed a voice memo into my phone, just in case. "If I disappear from this wedding, check the safe deposit box. Box 214, Heritage Trust. Keys taped under my dresser drawer. And tell Marcus, tell him I tried to wait." I hit send to my closest friend Lena, then deleted the draft. No paper trail, not yet. I'd worn Nana's ring that night, not out of defiance, but duty. She pressed it into my palm 3 weeks before she died, her skin papery and cool, her voice barely above a whisper but ironclad in its intent. "This stays on your finger," she'd said, "not because it's pretty but because it's proof." At the time, I thought she meant proof of her love. Later, I learned she meant proof of everything. Now sitting on the edge of a velvet chaise in the back of a police cruiser, still in my bridesmaid dress, wrists raw from where the zip ties had been cut free, I replayed every warning sign I'd ignored. The way my cousin Leela had jokingly asked a month ago if Nana ever mentioned changing her will. The sudden interest from Aunt Dolores who held power of attorney. The odd silence from the family lawyer, Mr. Calloway, who'd stopped returning my calls after Nana's diagnosis. They'd been circling for months, sharpening their narrative. Maya's the caregiver, so of course she's manipulating Mom. Of course she's stealing. But this public takedown at a wedding, that was new. That was designed to humiliate me into silence, to make me seem unstable, greedy, unhinged, anything but credible. And for a split second, standing there with champagne bubbling mockingly beside me, I almost believed their version of me. Then Uncle Marcus walked in. And suddenly, I wasn't alone anymore. This isn't a story about dramatic confrontations or courtroom theatrics, though those will come. This is about the quiet, meticulous work of being believed when your family decides you're disposable. It's about receipts saved in shoeboxes, not rage. It's about the kind of patience that looks like passivity until the moment it is. If you've ever been called too sensitive for wanting fairness or selfish for protecting what was promised to you, if you've ever been cornered at a family gathering while someone rewrote your history in real time, know this: you're not crazy. You're not greedy. You're just outnumbered, and documentation is your equalizer. So if this resonates, if you've ever stood in a room full of people who claim to love you while erasing your truth, drop a ring in the comments. Not for me, for you. As a quiet signal to yourself and others, I was there, I remember, and I'm still standing. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say, wait, let me show you what really happened. The Grand Meridian Ballroom glittered like something out of a dream someone else was having, a dream I wasn't invited to understand. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto ivory-draped tables, each centerpiece a cascade of white peonies and trailing ivy, candles flickering in delicate hurricane vases. Soft jazz hummed beneath the murmur of clinking glasses and polite laughter. It was all so meticulously beautiful, so carefully curated to signal joy, unity, legacy. But beneath the surface, the air felt thin, charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. I kept my left hand tucked against my thigh, fingers curled just enough to hide the ring, but not too much, not like I was ashamed. Nana's sapphire sat heavy on my finger, its platinum band cool against my skin, the stone a deep midnight blue that caught the light like a secret. It wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. Everyone in this room knew it. It had been on Nana's hand for 62 years, through her wedding, through raising 4 children, through burying my grandfather, through chemotherapy and hospital stays and quiet mornings in her sunroom reading poetry aloud. It was more than jewelry. It was a ledger of her life. To them it was an heirloom, a symbol of bloodline meant to pass down to the oldest daughter's line, which technically was Aunt Dolores, though she'd barely visited Nana in her final year. To me it was a covenant. Nana had slipped it onto my finger herself during one of our last clear mornings together. "This isn't about who's next in line," she'd whispered, her voice raspy but eyes sharp as flint. "It's about who showed up." She pressed a folded paper into my other hand, a notarized addendum to her will, dated just 10 days prior, witnessed by her attorney and her home health aide. I'd memorized every word. I bequeathed my sapphire ring to Maya Chen, in recognition of her unwavering care, loyalty and love during my final years. But here, in this ballroom of curated perfection, none of that mattered. All they saw was a ring on the hand of the quiet niece, who'd isolated Nana in her final months, an accusation they'd whispered to neighbors, to the hospice staff, even to the estate lawyer. They painted me as the villain in a story they'd rewritten while I was too busy changing IV bags and paying utility bills to notice. And the ring, it was the perfect prop for their narrative. I watched Leela across the room, resplendent in ivory silk, accepting compliments with a practiced smile. She hadn't visited Nana once in the last 6 months, not even when she coded in February. But tonight she'd leaned into Aunt Dolores during cocktail hour and murmured loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "It's just so strange Maya's wearing that ring. Nana would never have given it to her." The seed was planted, watered with gossip. Now they were ready to harvest my reputation. I thought about the box in my closet at home, the one labelled Nana Final Instructions. Inside, not just the addendum, but bank statements showing I'd paid her property taxes for 2 years, pharmacy receipts, signed care logs, even a recorded voicemail from Nana saying, "Maya, you're my heart now. Don't let them take that away." They saw a ring. I saw a promise. And rings, I was beginning to understand, could bind you in more ways than one. For 3 years, my life had revolved around a small, sun-faded house on Sycamore Lane, the same house where my grandmother Alina had raised 4 children, buried a husband, and outlived 2 siblings. I hadn't planned to become her full-time caregiver. None of it had been dramatic at first, just a series of small surrenders. I'd moved in temporarily after her fall in 2022, sleeping on the pull-out couch in the den while juggling freelance design work on my laptop. But temporary stretched into months, then years, as her COPD worsened and her memory began to fray at the edges. I became the one who knew how she took her tea, 2 sugars, splash of oat milk, which pills went with breakfast and which with dinner, how to reset the oxygen concentrator when it beeped at 3 a.m. I learned to decipher the subtle shifts in her breathing. The quiet panic when she couldn't catch her breath, the exhausted relief when the nebulizer kicked in. I drove her to every appointment, filled out every insurance form in triplicate, argued with pharmacy clerks when her prescriptions were delayed. I held her hand during the bone biopsy, wiped her tears after she forgot my name for the first time, and sat with her in silence when words failed us both. Meanwhile, my cousins, Leela, Daniel and Grace, made appearances like clockwork. Birthdays, holidays and the occasional, we should really check in brunch that always ended with them leaving before lunch. They'd post photos on Instagram with captions like, "Family is everything." Nana propped up between them on the sofa, smiling bravely, but never stayed long enough to see her wheeze through the night or struggle to swallow her dinner. They called me so noble in group texts, but their voices always carried a question underneath. Why is she doing all this? What's she getting out of it? The imbalance wasn't just emotional, it was meticulously, legally stacked against me. Aunt Dolores, as the oldest sibling, had always been treated as the family matriarch-in-waiting, even though she lived 2 states away and hadn't spoken to Nana in months before her death. Leela, ever the strategist, had married a real estate developer with connections and suddenly developed a passionate interest in preserving Nana, legacy, which, conveniently, included the Sycamore house, now worth nearly $1 million after the neighborhood's gentrification. What they didn't know, what Nana had kept hidden, even from me at first, was that she'd changed everything. After Leela's husband casually suggested she add him to the deed for tax purposes, Nana had gone cold. She contacted her attorney, a no-nonsense woman named Ms. Prout who'd handled her affairs since the 90s and set a new plan in motion. She removed Leela's husband from any financial access. She updated her durable power of attorney, giving it solely to me. And she drafted a new last will, with specific language disinheriting anyone who attempted to exploit my vulnerability during my final years. But Nana knew they wouldn't accept it. She knew they'd call her confused, manipulated, senile. So she buried the truth like treasure and sent Uncle Marcus away to guard it. Because what was at stake wasn't just a house or a ring. It was the erasure of 3 years of sacrifice, of love shown not in grand gestures but in sleepless nights and pill organizers, and the quiet dignity of showing up when no one was watching. They thought caregiving was weakness. They didn't realize it was the most powerful kind of documentation. I hadn't seen Uncle Marcus in over 2 years, not since the day of Nana's funeral when he'd stood at the edge of the gravesite in a black overcoat, his face unreadable, while the rest of the family hugged and sobbed and whispered condolences that sounded more like inventory assessments. He'd slipped away before the reception, leaving only a folded note tucked into my coat pocket. "Keep your head down, save everything, I'll be back when it's safe." I'd stared at those words for weeks, wondering if safe meant for me, for him, or for the truth itself. And now here he was, standing in the middle of a wedding reception chaos, his shoes scuffed, his tie slightly crooked, that manila envelope in his hand like a shield forged from paper and principle. The moment his eyes met mine, something inside me unclenched. Not because he'd come to rescue me, though God knows I needed it, but because his presence meant Nana's plan had worked. She'd known they'd turn on me. She'd known they'd isolate me, discredit me, maybe even try to scare me off. So she'd sent her most loyal son into exile to protect the one thing they couldn't argue with, the law. He didn't touch me at first. He just stood there, shoulders squared, voice low, but carrying like it always had when he used to read us bedtime stories as kids. "You've got 10 seconds, he said to Aunt Dolores, not even looking at her, his gaze fixed on the knot of relatives gathered like vultures. "To release her wrists before I call the sheriff and read this will aloud right here in front of God and your wedding photographer." The room stilled, even the string quartet seemed to pause mid-note. Aunt Dolores laughed, but it was brittle, nervous. "Oh, come on, Marcus, don't be dramatic. We're just sorting out a family matter." "Family matters," he said, finally turning to her, "don't include false imprisonment, public defamation, or attempted theft by coercion." He held up the envelope. "This is the last valid will and testament of Elena Me Whitmore, signed, witnessed, notarized, and filed with the county clerk 2 weeks before she passed. It explicitly names Myra as sole beneficiary of her personal effects, including the sapphire ring you've been badmouthing all evening." Then he did something that made my breath catch. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, the same one Nana used to keep her spare reading glasses in. He opened it, and inside wasn't another ring but a thumb drive. "And this," he said, voice quieter now, "just for me, is every recorded conversation, every altered document, every bank inquiry they tried to bury. Nana started saving it the day Leela's husband asked her to simplify the deed." In that moment I saw it, not just the evidence but the love behind it. Nana hadn't just left me protection. She left me proof that I'd been seen, that my sleepless nights, my cancelled vacations, my quiet endurance, they'd all been witnessed. And Uncle Marcus, the quietest of her children, had carried that witness across 2 years of silence just to hand it back to me when I needed it most. His eyes, the same warm brown as Nana's, held mine. No pity, no anger, just certainty. "You're not alone, kid," he said, so softly only I could hear. "You never were." And for the first time since they'd zip-tied my wrists, I believed it. Later that night, long after the wedding venue had emptied, and the last of the police officers had taken my statement, and declined to press charges, citing family dispute with a tired sigh, I sat in the back seat of Uncle Marcus's old sedan, parked under a flickering street lamp 3 blocks from the Grand Meridian. Rain had started to fall, soft, steady, the kind that rinses the world clean without fanfare. My wrists still ached where the plastic ties had bitten in, but it was a distant throb compared to the electric hum of disbelief still buzzing under my skin. Uncle Marcus didn't speak right away. He just handed me a thermos of tea, chamomile with honey, the way Nana used to make it when I was anxious, and then with the quiet reverence reserved for sacred objects passed me a single sheet of paper. It was crisp, official, stamped with the seal of St. Marguerite Medical Group. At the top, in bold type, Affidavit of Competency, ELEANORWHITMOI. My hands shook as I read it. Dated April 12, just 3 weeks before Nana passed, the document was signed by Dr. Althea Ruiz, her primary care physician for over 15 years. In clear, clinical language, it confirmed that on March 28, during a routine cognitive assessment, Nana had scored 29 out of 30 on the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, a score well within normal range for her age. More importantly, Dr. Ruiz attested that Nana had demonstrated full understanding of her estate planning decisions. During a private consultation that same afternoon, specifically referencing her intent to revise beneficiary designations to reflect recent caregiving contributions. There in black and white was the first receipt, not a dramatic reveal but a quiet, devastating rebuttal to everything they'd claimed. She was confused. She didn't know what she was signing. Maya pressured her. All of it dismantled by a timestamp, a signature, and the professional credibility of a woman who'd delivered 2 of Nana's grandchildren. "They'll say it's forged," I whispered, voice raw. Uncle Marcus shook his head. "Dr. Ruiz is ready to testify. She kept her own notes, dated, signed, cross-referenced with office logs, and she's furious they used her name in their petition." He tapped the paper. "This isn't the whole case, Maya, but it's the foundation. It proves they knew she was lucid, which means their whole undue influence claim, it's not just wrong, it's malicious." I stared out the rain-streaked window, watching droplets race down the glass. All those months of being called manipulative, greedy, opportunistic, and the truth had been sitting in a doctor's file the whole time. Safe, validated, waiting. Then Marcus reached into his briefcase and pulled out a second folder. "There's more," he said, "but we take it one layer at a time, like peeling an onion." He gave a small, tired smile. "Nana always said justice isn't fast, but it's thorough." I folded the affidavit carefully and tucked it into my dress pocket, next to the sapphire ring. It wasn't just paper, it was armor. And for the first time I felt like I might actually survive this war they'd declared on my dignity. But even as relief washed over me, a colder thought settled in. If this was just the first receipt, what were they hiding deeper down, and how badly would they fight to keep it buried? The week after the wedding fiasco should have been a reprieve, a chance to breathe, to process, to let the bruises on my wrists fade. Instead, it felt like walking through a minefield where every step triggered a new explosion. 2 days in. Leela filed a police report alleging I'd stolen Nana. Irreplaceable family heirlooms, including the sapphire ring, a set of antique pearl earrings, and a silver locket that had belonged to our great-grandmother. The officer who took my statement barely looked up from his screen, muttering something about civil matters, but the damage was done. The accusation was now part of an official record, a seed planted in case this ever went to court. Worse, I stumbled upon the listing myself, purely by accident, while scrolling through a resale app Lena had recommended for vintage jewellery. There it was, Nana's pearl earrings photographed against a velvet backdrop captioned "Rare Victorian Heirloom, Estate Sale, Motivated Seller." Price $4,200, the username, Leela W. My stomach dropped. They weren't just trying to discredit me, they were liquidating Nana's legacy like it was garage sale junk. Desperate for clarity, I called Mr. Calloway, the family lawyer who'd handled Nana's original will. His receptionist put me through after a long pause, and when his voice finally came on the line, it was stiff, distant. "Maya," he said, "I understand you're upset, but this is a sensitive probate situation. Until the court rules on the validity of the documents your uncle produced, I can't entertain claims from either side. But she left me the ring, I said, voice cracking, in writing with witnesses. Allegedly, he replied, and that single word, the legal hedge, the polite dismissal, hit like a slap. He wasn't just neutral, he was already leaning their way. That night, I drove alone to the county courthouse archives, my heart pounding like I was doing something illegal just by seeking the truth. The building was nearly empty, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, as I filled out the request form for property records on 1427 Sycamore Lane. The clerk, a woman with kind eyes and a name tag that read Marjorie, handed me a thick printout with a look that said she'd seen this story before. And then I saw it. Dated 2 days after Nana's death, April 19, a deed transfer recorded with the county clerk listing Leela and her husband, Derek, as joint grantees of the Sycamore house. The grantor, Elena M. Whitmore, but the signature, it wasn't hers, not even close. Nana's handwriting was elegant, looping, with a distinctive flourish on the capital. This was a shaky, cramped scrawl, like someone trying to mimic a signature they'd only seen in passing. My hands went cold. They hadn't just contested the will. They forged a deed. They tried to steal the house outright while I was still planning her funeral. I sat in my car for an hour afterward, the printout trembling in my lap, rain drumming softly on the roof. The wedding humiliation had been cruel, but this was criminal. And it meant they weren't just fighting for inheritance. They were trying to erase me from the story entirely, brick by brick, document by document. I pulled out my phone and texted Uncle Marcus a single line. They forged the deed, I have the copy. His reply came instantly. Don't move, I'll be there in 20, and Maya, bring the affidavit. Because now we weren't just defending a will. We were building a case. The rain hadn't stopped by morning. It fell in a steady grey veil as I stood outside Heritage Trust Bank, the same institution where Nana had opened her first savings account in 1963. I clutched the county deed printout like a live wire, its edges damp from the walk across the parking lot. Uncle Marcus had insisted we go together, but he was running late, something about contacting a forensic document examiner, so I took a breath and pushed through the glass doors alone. Inside, the bank smelled of lemon polish and old paper, the hushed tones of tellers and clients blending into a calm hum. I approached the service desk, heart hammering, and asked for Ms. Elena Cho, the senior branch manager who'd known Nana since the Carter administration. The young teller blinked. Ms. Cho retired last year, but she still comes in every Thursday to volunteer with our elder financial safety program. She pointed toward a corner office with the door slightly ajar. She's in there now, actually. I walked over, knocked softly, and stepped inside. Ms. Cho looked up from a stack of brochures, her silver hair pulled into a neat bun, wire-rimmed glasses perched on her nose. She was in her early 70s, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense, the kind of woman who could spot a bounced check from across the room. When she saw me, her expression softened. Maya, Elena's Maya. I nodded, suddenly overwhelmed. I'm sorry to just show up, Ms. Cho, but I think something illegal happened with Nana's accounts. She didn't hesitate. Sit down, child, and tell me everything. I laid it out, the forged deed, the police report, the resale listing, the way they'd tried to publicly shame me into silence. Then I handed her the bank statement I'd printed from Nana's online portal the night before, a withdrawal of $18,250 from her joint checking account, dated April 20, just 1 day after the fake deed was filed. The transaction was labelled internal transfer, routed to an LLC called Sycamore Holdings LLC. I looked it up, registered to Derek, Leela's husband. Ms. Cho's face went still. She tapped the screen of her desktop, fingers flying. Elena closed her joint account with Leela back in January, she said quietly. After that odd conversation Leela had with our loan officer about asset protection, we flagged it internally. She pulled up another screen. This transfer, it shouldn't have cleared. Leela wasn't an authorized signatory after January 12. She picked up her desk phone and dialed a 4-digit extension. Robert, it's Elena. I need a full transaction audit on account 7742, Whitmore Elena me, and pull the signature card from January. Yes, the one with the red flag. She hung up, then turned to me, eyes blazing with a fierceness that reminded me of Nana. They used an old signature stamp she revoked months ago. We have footage of Derek at the drive-thru that day, he knew. 10 minutes later, a bank security officer arrived with a printed log, time-stamped, itemized, with Derek's ID scan attached. Ms. Cho initialed every page, then made a certified copy on bank letterhead. This goes straight to the county fraud unit, she said, handing me the originals. And to your uncle, and to probate court. As I left the bank, Uncle Marcus pulled up in his sedan. I handed him the documents without a word. He scanned the first page, then let out a long breath. This, he said, isn't just fraud, it's elder financial abuse, a felony in this state. But what struck me most wasn't the legal weight of the papers. It was the way Ms. Cho had looked at me, not with suspicion, but with recognition. As if she'd been waiting for someone to finally ask the right questions. Because sometimes the most powerful allies aren't the loudest. They're the ones who have been holding the receipts all along. I called the family meeting under the pretense of reconciliation. Let's clear the air, I'd texted in the group thread for Nana's sake. I knew they'd come, they always came when they thought they were winning. Aunt Dolores RSVP'd first with a string of heart emojis. Leela replied, of course, Maya. We just want what's best for everyone, followed by a photo of herself watering the garden at 1427 Sycamore Lane, the house they'd already started treating as theirs. I arrived early that afternoon before the others and spent 2 quiet hours in Nana's empty townhouse. Sunlight streamed through the bay windows, catching dust motes in the air like tiny suspended memories. I'd had the locks changed after the forged deed surfaced, and now the house felt both haunted and holy, a space caught between grief and justice. In the living room, I set up a small projector on Nana's old oak side table, the same one where she used to place her teacup and crossword puzzle. I tested the connection, adjusted the screen, and then waited. They arrived together, Aunt Dolores in a tailored linen suit, Leela in designer jeans and oversized sunglasses, Derek trailing behind with the smug ease of a man who thinks property equals power. They breezed in like they owned the place, Leela even humming as she ran a finger along the mantel, checking for dust. Nice to see you finally letting go of the drama, Maya, Aunt Dolores said, settling onto the sofa like a queen reclaiming her throne. We were worried you'd let this thing ruin the family forever. I didn't sit, I stood near the projector, hands folded, voice steady. I invited you here because I believe in truth over peace, and today you're going to see both. Before they could respond, I clicked the remote. On the wall beside Nana's portrait, the first document appeared, the forged deed, zoomed in on the signature line. This, I said, was filed 2 days after Nana died. But her signature was revoked from all joint accounts and property documents in January, something Derek knew when he submitted this. Leela laughed, but it was tight, strained. Oh, please, anyone can say a signature's fake. I clicked again. The bank fraud notice filled the wall, certified, stamped, with Derek's ID and the transaction log. This shows $18,250 transferred illegally from Nana's account to your LLC, Derek. Heritage Trust has filed a fraud alert. The sheriff's financial crimes unit has been notified. Derek's face went pale. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Then I clicked a third time. There, projected in crisp black and white, was the affidavit from Dr. Ruiz, Nana's cognitive assessment score, her clear intent, her final wishes. She wasn't confused, I said, my voice low but carrying. She was precise, and she knew exactly who deserved her trust. Silence descended like a velvet curtain. Aunt Dolores stared at the wall, lips parted. Leela's sunglasses slipped down her nose. And that's when Uncle Marcus stepped out of the hallway, quietly, deliberately, and placed a sealed envelope on the coffee table. This, he said, is the original last will and testament, along with the notarized addendum naming Myra sole heir to the house, the ring, and all personal effects. It's been submitted to probate court. The hearing is Monday. I looked at each of them, not with anger but with finality. You can leave now, I said, or you can stay and hear what Nana wrote about you in her final letter. For the first time, they looked afraid. Not of losing the house, but of being truly seen. The room didn't just go quiet. It emptied of sound, as if the air itself had been sucked out. Even the distant hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen seemed to pause. Leela's sunglasses dangled from her fingers now, forgotten. Derek sat rigid, jaw clenched, eyes darting between the projected documents and the sealed envelope on the coffee table like a man calculating escape routes. Aunt Dolores, usually so composed, fiddled with her pearl necklace. The very one she'd insisted was meant for the eldest line, her knuckles white. I walked to the center of the room where Nana used to sit in her favorite armchair, the one with the crocheted afghan she'd made during the winter of '09. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't need to. Before she died, I began, Nana wrote a letter, not a legal document, though it's been notarized as part of the estate file, but a personal statement. She called it my final truth. Uncle Marcus handed me a sheet of paper, the edges slightly worn from being folded and refolded. I recognized Nana's handwriting immediately, the looping M, the careful cross of her T's, the faint lavender scent still clinging to the paper just like her stationery. My throat tightened, but I steadied myself. This wasn't just for me, it was for her. I began to read. To my family, those who remained and those who disappeared, I write this so there will be no confusion, no revision, no convenient forgetting. I am of sound mind, clear heart and unshaken will. Maya did not manipulate me. She held me when I couldn't breathe. She paid my bills when my pension fell short. She stayed when you all had more important plans. While you sent flowers after I passed, she held my hand as I faded. Leela, you asked me once if I'd considered leaving the house to Derek for tax efficiency. When I refused, you stopped calling. Derek, you tried to pressure me into signing a quitclaim at my kitchen table while I was still weak from chemo. I recorded that conversation. It's in the safe. Dolores, you told the neighbors I was losing it because I chose Maya over tradition. But tradition doesn't change bedpans. Tradition doesn't sit up all night when the oxygen alarm goes off. So let this be known. I leave my home, my sapphire ring, my journals and my truth to Maya not as a reward but as repayment. And to the rest of you, you will get nothing from my estate except this letter. Read it, learn from it, and never again pretend that love is measured by blood alone. I looked up. Leela's face was flushed, her eyes glistening, not with tears of remorse but of humiliation. Derek stood abruptly, knocking over his water glass. It shattered on the hardwood, the sound shockingly loud. But I wasn't done. I held up the sapphire ring, letting the afternoon light pour through the stone until it cast a deep blue pool on the wall, right beside the projected image of the forged deed. This ring, I said, is not stolen. It is sworn. And every word Nana wrote is backed by documents, timestamps and witnesses. Then I did something I'd been waiting to do since they zip-tied my wrists at that wedding. I placed the notarized addendum, signed by Nana, witnessed by her attorney and home health aide, next to the original will on the coffee table. This goes to probate Monday, I repeated, echoing Uncle Marcus's earlier words. But you're welcome to hear it one more time before you leave. No one spoke. No one moved. In that silence, the truth didn't roar. It simply settled, like dust after a storm, like light after a long night, finally irrevocably seen. 6 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning so ordinary it felt surreal, I sat in a wood-panelled courtroom that smelled faintly of lemon oil and old paper, watching the probate judge, Judge Arden, a woman with silver-streaked hair and a reputation for zero tolerance for family theatrics, stamp her gavel once softly, like she was closing a book rather than delivering a verdict. Petition to contest the last will and testament of Elena Me Whitmore is hereby dismissed, she announced, her voice dry as parchment. The forged deed recorded April 19 is declared null and void. All contested assets revert to the estate as outlined in the valid will dated March 28. That was it, no fanfare, no dramatic pronouncement, just 3 sentences that undid months of lies, coercion and public shamming with the quiet finality of a locked door. But the real reversal had begun long before the gavel fell. It started the moment the bank's fraud alert triggered a county investigation, which then uncovered that Derek had used a revoked signature authorization, something Heritage Trust's internal audit flagged as a clear violation of the Elder Financial Protection Act. That violation turned a civil dispute into a criminal referral. The sheriff's office didn't just serve eviction papers for the townhouse they'd tried to squat in. They handed Derek a formal notice of investigation for elder financial exploitation, a felony carrying up to 5 years in this state. And then there was the deed. The county clerk's office, once they compared the forged signature to Nana's verified samples from her 2022 power of attorney and 2023 tax filings, issued a certificate of invalidity within 72 hours. The house was never theirs, not legally, not ethically, not even for a single night. What struck me most wasn't the legal language, though, it was the way power shifted without spectacle. There were no sirens, no handcuffs, no viral courtroom outbursts. Instead, justice arrived in stamped envelopes, notarized affidavits, and the calm authority of professionals who'd seen this pattern before. The sudden interest in an elder's assets, the rushed documents, the smear campaign against the caregiver. By noon, the title to 1427 Sycamore Lane was officially restored to the estate, with me named as sole beneficiary. The sapphire ring was legally mine, not by inheritance but by explicit bequest, documented and witnessed. Even the pearl earrings Leela had tried to sell. The resale platform had frozen the listing after Heritage Trust filed a stolen property notice, citing the probate case. They were returned to me in a padded envelope, accompanied by an apology. As I walked out of the courthouse, Uncle Marcus fell into step beside me, hands in his coat pockets, the autumn sun glinting off his glasses. "She'd be proud," he said simply. I nodded, touching the sapphire on my finger. Because this wasn't victory in the way movies portray it, loud, vengeful, triumphant. It was restoration. A quiet, lawful correction of a story they'd tried to steal. And for the first time in years, the house on Sycamore Lane was finally home again. Not because I'd won, but because the truth had been allowed to stand, unedited, in the light. They didn't go to jail. There were no perp walks, no mugshots splashed across local news, no dramatic courtroom sentencing. And in a way, that was the most fitting consequence of all, because their punishment wasn't confinement. It was exposure. Leela vanished first. Her Instagram, once a curated gallery of brunches, vacations, and blessed captions, went dark overnight. Then came the whispers. She'd been quietly let go from her marketing firm after HR received a copy of the bank fraud notice during a routine background check for a promotion. Derek, once so confident in his real estate connections, lost his broker's license when the State Ethics Board opened an investigation into the forged deed and improper use of elder client signatures. His LLC, Sycamore Holdings, was administratively dissolved for failure to file disclosures, ironic given the name. Aunt Dolores tried to save face. She sent a group email titled "Moving Forward with Grace," in which she claimed the whole ordeal had been a misunderstanding and urged everyone to let bygones be bygones. But the family tree had fractured. Cousins who'd once nodded along at her dinner table now muted her calls. Even her bridge club stopped inviting her. Their spouses, it turned out, worked in finance and they'd heard things. Reputation, I realized, is a currency far more fragile than cash. And once it's spent, it doesn't come back with interest. Meanwhile, the townhouse stood empty for a week after the sheriff's eviction notice was served, just long enough for me to deep clean every room, repaint the kitchen in Nana's favorite sage green, and replace the locks one final time. The morning I moved back in, I sat on the back porch with a cup of tea, listening to the wind rustle through the maple tree she'd planted when I was 5. There were no grand celebrations, no victory party. Just silence, sunlight, and the profound relief of safety restored. What they lost wasn't just property or money, it was credibility, access, the unspoken privilege of being believed simply because they bore the family name. And in the quiet aftermath, I understood something Nana had known all along. The cruelest thing you can do to someone who weaponizes family is to let them keep their freedom, while stripping away the narrative they used to justify their theft. They're still out there, living their lives, but they'll never walk into a room full of relatives and be seen as the rightful heirs again. They'll never wear Nana's pearls without feeling the weight of what they tried to erase. And me, I sleep through the night now. Because justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just closes the door and leaves you in peace. 3 months after the probate ruling, I sat at Nana's old writing desk, the one with the inlaid cherry wood and the slightly warped drawer that only opened if you jiggled the handle just right, and composed a letter. Not a legal document, not a demand, but an offer. One copy went to Leela, another to Derek, a third to Aunt Dolores. In it I listed every personal item of Nana's they'd touched, worn, or claimed over the years. The pearl earrings now back in my possession, the hand-stitched quilt from her mother, the set of Depression-era teacups, even the framed photo of her and Grandpa on their honeymoon in '58. All of it catalogued with dates and descriptions, as if preparing evidence, but this time for return, not retention. I gave them one condition: sign a sworn affidavit retracting the public accusation that I stole Nana's ring, acknowledge the validity of her final will, and agree to never set foot on Sycamore Lane again without written permission. There would be no financial settlement, no apology demanded, just truth in writing and a boundary drawn in ink. I also included a note: if you choose not to accept, the items will remain in my care. I will preserve them. I will honor their history. And if you ever have children, they are welcome to see them when they're old enough to understand what it means to value legacy over possession. Leela never responded. Not a text, not an email, not even a snide comment through a mutual cousin. Derek's lawyer sent a curt reply declining any further engagement. Aunt Dolores called me once, voice trembling, asking if we could just talk over coffee like old times. I said no. Not out of spite, but because old times were part of the problem. They were the cover story they used to justify their betrayal. And yet I kept the box ready. It sits now in the cedar closet upstairs, wrapped in acid-free tissue, labelled simply, "For them if they choose truth." Because grace, I've learned, isn't about reconciliation on their terms. It's not about forgiving so they feel better. Grace is the conscious decision not to become what hurt you. It's refusing to let their cruelty harden your heart into something unrecognizable. It's saying, I could shut you out forever, but I won't. I'll leave the door unlocked just enough for honesty to walk through, but it will never swing wide for manipulation again. Nana taught me that love without boundaries is just exhaustion in disguise. So my grace comes with conditions, not as punishment but as protection. Not to control them but to honor myself and her, and the quiet truth that some ties are meant to loosen, not break. The sapphire ring still rests on my finger, but now it doesn't just symbolize inheritance. It reminds me that the strongest form of compassion is the kind that knows when to say, this far, no further. This spring I replanted Nana's garden. Not the whole thing, just the back corner beneath the bay window where she used to sit with her morning tea, wrapped in that faded blue shawl she refused to throw out even when the edges frayed. I dug my hands into the damp earth, fingers brushing against the cold remnants of last year's roots, and tucked in new rose bushes, hybrid teas in deep crimson and blush pink, the same varieties she'd tended for 40 years. The soil smelled of rain and memory, and for the first time since she died it didn't hurt to be here. It felt like communion. Inside, the townhouse breathes differently now. Lighter, freer. I turned her study, the room where she signed her final will, where Derek once tried to pressure her into signing away her home, into a small community space. Once a week I host informal gatherings for elders and caregivers navigating family disputes over inheritance or elder care. We don't give legal advice, but we share resources. How to spot financial red flags, how to document care hours, how to find an elder law attorney who won't nickel and dime you into silence. Ms. Cho from the bank volunteers as a guest speaker sometimes. So does Dr. Ruiz. On my desk, in a velvet-lined box beside a framed photo of Nana holding me as a child, rests the sapphire ring. I don't wear it every day anymore, not because I've moved on but because its purpose has shifted. It's no longer armor, it's an heirloom again, but on my terms. And hanging beside it on a brass hook shaped like an olive branch is the key to safe deposit box 214 at Heritage Trust. The one I'd hidden under my dresser drawer. The one that held the original addendum, the thumb drive of recorded conversations, the ledger of every pharmacy receipt, every utility bill I paid, every night I stayed awake listening to her breathe. The box is still active. The key is polished but unused, because everything that needed protection has been seen, validated, and settled. Rings once meant entrapment for me, the zip tie at the wedding, the invisible expectations of good daughter duty, the way they tried to bind me to silence with shame. But now the ring symbolizes something else, clarity, continuity, the unbroken line between intention and action, between love shown and love honored. Sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn I sit on the new bench I installed beneath the bay window, built from reclaimed wood, smooth to the touch, and watch the first light streak across the garden. The roses are still small but they're growing, strong, rooted. Just like me. The house is just mine by legal decree. It's mine by witness, by truth, by the quiet, relentless act of showing up, even when the world tries to tie you down in public. And in that stillness, I finally understand what Nana meant when she said, "This isn't about who's next in line, it's about who showed up." I showed up. And because I did, her truth and mine got to stay. If you've ever stood in a room full of people who claim to love you while rewriting your story into something unrecognizable, if you've been called greedy for wanting what was promised, dramatic for setting a boundary, or ungrateful for refusing to be erased, then this ending is for you. Not because justice always comes, but because it can when you refuse to let silence be your only inheritance. What happened to me wasn't rare, it was textbook. Elder financial abuse, caregiver gaslighting, public shamming as a weapon. It happens in kitchens and courtrooms and wedding receptions every day, often in families just like ours. But the antidote isn't rage, it's rigor. Save the texts. Timestamp the care logs. Keep copies of every prescription you fill, every bill you pay, every time you show up when no one's watching. Because love may be invisible in the moment, but documentation makes it undeniable in hindsight. And never let the word family be used to justify theft, coercion, or cruelty. Blood doesn't guarantee loyalty, presence does. If you see yourself in this story, drop a gemstone in the comments, not as a symbol of loss, but of resilience. A quiet signal that you too are rebuilding on truth. And if you'd like the checklist I now share with caregivers in our community circle, the one that includes 5 legal safeguards every caregiver should request before moving in, I've linked it in the description below. It's free, no email needed, just pay it forward when you can. This isn't the end of my journey, but it is the close of this chapter. There's another story forming, one about turning pain into protection, about how I'm working with elder advocates to push for mandatory financial consent protocols in hospice care. But that's for another time. For now, I'll leave you with what Nana whispered to me on her last clear morning. Don't let them make you small. The truth is your birthright, not theirs to take. So stand in your truth, document your dignity, and never apologize for choosing peace over performance. Because the quiet ones, we've been building our case all along.